Hello, all those beautiful faces. My name is Stephanie Edmonds. Welcome to Teaching Liberty. To think free, you have to live free. And I have a free thought expert on here tonight. I know I'm a little, the word expert, it's like a little thing, but I do know you in real life and you have credibility and expertise in my book. So I'm going to go with it. And so open up your minds. Get ready for an awesome show tonight. Make sure you hit that like button, subscribe if you're new here, and thank you, Timothy, so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me. So good to be here.
Yeah, and it's good to reconnect with you. We originally connected, what was it, 2.5 years ago now?
Yeah.
Something like that, when we were both standing up to the mandate madness that was happening in New York City. We were working for the New York City Department of Education, or at least I was. I'm not sure if I know like there was a lot of different people in a lot of different situations, whether they were contractors or teachers or paraprofessionals, or there was, anybody who was working within that New York City Department of Education. And really, any city worker was told, take the jab or lose your job. And we both said, all right, it looks like it's time to move on here. And I feel like we've both sort of gracefully been able to transition into this next part of our life. I feel more free. How about you?
Definitely feel more free. It's interesting that you say that because, and also in line with liberty, I typically will say that I was liberated. I was mandated for liberation. Uh,
Mm.
and so, yeah, I definitely feel more free. When it comes to I think the system in general, one of my greatest inspirations, especially during that time of transition, was Buckminster Fuller. I don't know if you've
I've
read.
never, I haven't heard of that. At first, I thought you were saying a curse word. I was like, oh.
No, so Buckminster Fuller has a quote. He has many quotes, and one of them I might misquote here, but I encourage everyone to look it up. He says to not spend energy fighting the old, but rather creating the new. And so when I think about the education system, I mean, the signposts were there long before 2020 for me. I did teach in the Department of Education for 12 years. I was a middle school and high school biology teacher, and so yeah, that quote for me really resonated.
Yeah, no, when you said it right now, it definitely resonates for me. I mean, I think things are worth fighting for, right? Like I'm involved in some lawsuits, right, about employment, but at the same time, I also feel like I can't totally 100% be in that fight. Like I know there's people still 2.5 years later who like wake up and go to sleep. I'm on a bunch of these text groups, and this is nothing against them. Everybody has it kind of like a different place where they need to be. But personally for me, that's not where I can't just like day in and day out be living in this world where I'm like, oh, they took my job away from me and like I deserve my job and all this and that. It's like, okay, like I'll do the lawsuits and stuff because I think it's right. But I'm kinda just like, it didn't work out between us. Let's move on," kind of person. That's how I do friendships. That's how I've done any sort of, like, confrontations that I've had in the past. Just, "All right, lesson learned. Time to move on, put myself in a better place, where I don't have this happen to me again," right? Where I don't allow this, or I don't allow somebody to do this to me, right? Because of course, they were wrong, but I feel like you have to always take responsibility in the moment. And in this
Absolutely.
world, it can be a hard thing to do, which is why I really would love to tap into some of your knowledge. So, can you talk to a little bit? Because I mean, you're a biology teacher, right? So, it's like a super hard science, right? We've got facts and we've got measurements and we have experiments we can do to prove them in the world. And now you've gone into this field of like mindfulness, meditation. You had something about embodiment, right? Movement to create embodiment. And sometimes these things are a little woo woo, right? I mean, I'm into it. I meditate, I do the yoga, but sometimes, they can be. So, I think that background is super interesting, right? Moving from biology to mindfulness. But tell me about like what you're doing and some of the principles that you're teaching, especially being in New York City, right? To
Yeah.
talk about a crazy world, you're right in the middle of it. So tell me about it.
Yeah. So my background, I've always been what I would consider myself to be a student of science in general. Now, interestingly, when I think that word in and of itself it's a loaded connotation, right? We typically think of the quantitative measurements, the ability to test things, but really what happens so often is that there's still this focus on what is the answer. Now, one of the interesting things is that in all of my studies throughout science, it was, the kind of the traditional stories that are used to teach science, especially the life sciences, start in a couple very predictable ways. We say that life begins at the cellular level, right? We say if you go into most settings and you say survival of the fittest, most people
Fittest.
will have kind of this, this idea, this connotation. And so one of the things that I'm really passionate about now is really bridging the gap between science and spirituality, because as I see it, they're not so separate. So I'll give you an example. Let's take a level, right? Most people will agree with that. Now, if you take that down from its kind of origin, then the cell is made up of these smaller component parts that aren't necessarily living. So life arises from something, right? It arises from something that perhaps we can't see, perhaps we can't touch, perhaps we can't feel, perhaps we can't measure. And so what happens a lot of times is that we become so focused on kind of this these things that we can
Tangible,
touch.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
the things that we can touch, and unless we can touch it, it's not real. Yet everything that we see once started in this invisible space of thought, right?
It's so crazy. My son today, we were coming home from his co-op, and he's like, "All right, so humans, right? You were made from your mom and dad, and then your mom and dad were made from your grandma and grandpa, and they were made from theirs, and it keeps going on and forever and forever." And then he was using it as a proof for God. Like that was
Mm,
his reasoning. He was like, "So you see, like obviously God had to be the creator, because like where do humans come from?" It was really cute, but
I love
I don't know, I
that.
just got like a little like parallels to sort of what you were saying there. Going taking that leap from the tangible to the intangible.
Yeah, and it's so interesting that conversation that your son was, or that dialogue that he was engaging in, like that was me as a kid, except I didn't necessarily feel like I could say it out loud.
Okay.
Right. So I grew up in Flint, Michigan, born and raised Flint, Michigan, all the way through public school, everything. Grew up in the traditional Black Baptist church, and so some of these larger questions, I didn't feel like I had that space to be able to ask them.
This
Now,
must have been pre toxic chemicals in the water.
listen, I got some thoughts that maybe there were some back then, but that's neither here nor there.
You seem to your brain seems to have done well with it.
Thank you, thank you. But yeah, so that dialogue is one that I was very familiar with as a kid. So when we start to talk about, like, I'll give you an example. As a kid, it was always nurtured in the way that as long as I expressed a certain curiosity or a wondering about something, it was nurtured up to a certain point. But some of the larger questions, you don't necessarily ask those questions. So I love that line of thinking. But even as a kid, I was very much drawn to nature. I used to ask questions about uh, definitely about planetary happenings and who was in control. How are these things able to continue to orbit the way that they were? Who turned the lights on when the sun came up? Like, and the other side of the world is dark. Like, what kind of genius is that?
Well, allegedly, it's on the
Allegedly,
other side, right? Allegedly.
allegedly. So I think I've always had some level of curiosity, especially when it came to what I was observing in sort of my everyday experiences. So I followed the traditional track through science, majored in biology and chemistry, started doing research as an undergrad where I focused on cancer biology. And even then, you know, there was like this conflict because here, the thing that really attracted me to a PhD program was being able to ask big questions that nobody had answers to. Here I was going to, I won't say the name of the institution, but I was studying cancer biology, and academically, it was like I wasn't cutting it. But in terms of the research, in terms of asking the questions, I could do it. Um, and so,
And what's the difference there, right? Like, what's the difference between like what you when you made that separation between like, oh, I wasn't cutting it in academics, but I was good in the research. Like, how could you be so successful at the research if you were, in the way in my mind, like not able to keep up, I guess, with the basics that you're learning in class? Or like, can you explain to me how that would be the case?
I mean, a clear cut answer, no. I guess the one that makes sense to me is like, we all learn differently. I think there's so much coming out now, especially about, how our brains are wired differently for sure. But even in terms of having some of the academic language and um, being able to access it in that way, I simply didn't
Right.
have it. So
Okay.
what took me a longer time to comprehend, to understand, to really grasp hold of, as opposed to the doing of it, right? That experiential piece of it
Okay.
really spoke to me a lot more. The ability and the opportunity to ask questions that, could again sort of drive thought in a particular direction. Yet you sit me down to take whatever the exam was, and it was
Right, remember
almost
all
like,
this
damn.
information and then repeat it to me in this formatted way. Okay, so that's what I was trying to get at. Like, it was
Yeah,
just like, the classroom, it's a very structured space, and, there's certainly something to be said for, like, taking in those basics and being able to do some of those things, but, I mean, if you're doing it 5 classes in a week, and then also I think it makes it harder, like, when you have this thing that you're super passionate about and, like, you're super interested, you're like, I wanna do that thing, like, I
I wanna do
really
the
wanna get
thing.
into that thing, and so then it makes, like, doing these other things even more burdensome.
Yeah. No, 100%. 100%. Yeah. So wait, where was I going? So when it came to going into the teaching space, this too is something that I feel like I've always had ingrained in me. So I was always teaching something, teaching an after school program, teaching a sports team, teaching whatever it was. So the practice of teaching came pretty naturally for me. Um, I would say in the traditional system, there were periods where very early on, I had to kind of turn the mirror to myself and see where I was playing a role in a way that didn't feel right for me. Um, and for me, it was around grades. Great. Maybe this is not a surprise. Grades for me were always like this just area of tension, because here we were using these symbols to then represent, like, you can cut it, you can't cut it, you. So I think that was a really challenging space for me. The entire time that I've been teaching, m- I would say that I had some aspect of a mindfulness practice. What's also true is that that practice was supposed to be mine and only mine. This wasn't like, I didn't go into a space to say, oh, I'm going to teach yoga, or I'm going to teach mindfulness, or I'm going to teach meditation. These were the things that not only helped to sustain me, but also connected me back to something much larger than myself. As I continue to go deeper into it, again, the connection between the science and the sort of spiritual piece of it, it's always been there. So I like to really peel back the layers. I always say that, it's a matter of demystifying what's kind of this mysticism. And so that's one of the things that I'm really passionate about now. I usually start with some of the basic elements of having an open mind.
All right, so what are they?
So, one, having an open mind, this learner's mind to put yourself in a space to learn something new. It's like any container. You take a container and you fill it with all of these things. There's no space for anything else. So one of the key tenets of mindfulness in general is really to make space for learning new things.
And for, like,
Curiosity.
not passing judgment, right? Like, here's something that you might normally be like, "Oh, those flat earthers or whatever," right? Because like, I made a little, nod to, like, "Oh, allegedly it's round." Um, but I definitely find myself, like, when I am thinking about, like, the planet, is it round? Is it flat Earth, right? I feel like I'm ingrained to be like, "No, like, heliocentrism has been proven beyond a doubt, and those flat earthers are totally crazy," right? And, I mean, at the end of the day, I'm probably not knowledgeable enough to, like, really pass judgment either way. Like, I didn't major in, like, biology or geology or whatever the ology is that you need to know that stuff, like planetology or something. Um, so, yeah, like, I just feel like sometimes you want to, like, have a certain conception, like, like, I'm pretty sure the Earth is round, but also, like, I don't think it's going to kill me to put those assumptions aside and listen to, like, another hypothesis about how the earth might be. And then at the end of the day, be like, that was interesting, right? Like,
Yeah. Yes.
so,
Noticing where like the judgment, the criticisms, those things come up because they do. They come up naturally, right? They come up, but then flipping the switch and like get curious. Like
right.
why do they believe that? Like where do they get their information from? And
Yes.
that's for anything.
Yes. I find it so interesting where people get their sources from. That's a
Mhm.
good one. And then also I like to think too that a lot of times, I'll be like, "Well, what if I just" like, for the masks, for example, right? Like, I was a pretty ardent anti-masker, but on the other side, there was people who were just as ardent maskers, and I just kept thinking to myself, like, I actually don't think that the way that they're thinking is much different from the way that I'm thinking. They just have, like, different underlying facts, but then from there, everything is almost the same, right? So I don't
Yeah.
know, maybe that
It it
helps give me empathy.
yeah, and it's a really important tool, especially in modern culture, because there are so many different points of view and perspectives. I mean, when you really boil down to, what the experience can be, it's all an interpretation based on, our experiences, our past, etc. And so that means that essentially there are that many different perspectives possible as there are people,
Right,
because the experiences that I have are imprinted from, from the moment I was born and the experiences that I had, and they can be very different than someone else. And so, oftentimes, one of the things that I like to consider is like zooming out from whatever the topic is, like you said, and seeing, is there something that I too defend? Is there something too that I feel strongly about? And so instead of seeing that person as other, can you find an aspect that's just like me?
mm.
You know,
Alright, so having an open mind,
having,
um,
I think I
or
kind of got into another one
clear
there.
mind, right? That
Mm,
was the for being able to think freely. First, we need to sort of just, like, empty out our mind, rid ourselves of judgment, and make a space for new ideas to come in.
I'd consider that more of a learner's, like a beginner's mind.
Okay, a beginner's mind, got it,
Yeah,
that's what you called it.
like like a beginner's mind. I think we also kind of touched on some curiosity there. We also touched on some non-judgment, because these three things I think are really important to helping us to widen our perception. I think, so often, and this was something that it really resonates with me around like the wording, change someone's mind. I mean, just think for a moment how hard it is to change our own mind. to change our own like thought process or a habit. Or And so instead of trying to change minds, like what would it be like to simply expand them so that they could hold more? So that yes, it can be your idea and your perception, and also hold someone else's.
Yeah, I like that. And two, I think like that's even true for things that you can't actually know for certain, right? There's so many narratives out there, so much, political issues or whatever it is. And I think everybody wants to be like, well, this is definitely how it is, or this is the right take. Whereas like I try to play multiple scenarios out in my mind. And I'm like, well, it could be this way, it could be this way, it could be this. It's probably some combination of all of the three. But yeah, running multiple scenarios is a big one as well.
Yeah.
Um, so this is just like, some super basics, I would say, just like for anybody thinking freely. What if you want to take it like a step further than just sort of like, oh, I'm thinking freely and I'm engaging in, expanding my mind perhaps a little bit more. Like, okay, how do I take it to the next level?
I would get curious, and I'm curious, like, what does the next level look like? Like, I'm asking you.
Oh, you're asking me. I
Yeah.
don't like, I was just saying, like, what are some other practices, I guess, like, whether is there, like, breathing exercises that we should be doing? Like, is there meditation? Is there or, like, just, like, certain types of movement? Because I know you talked about, like, embodiment movement, and I know that can definitely be, like, in the modern world, there's a lot of things that are disassociating, right? You have the phone in front of your face all day, like, being online even today when, I was, like, looking on the calendar, I'm, like, trying to think about, like, who you were because I'm, like, so used to talking to people in their online personas and in their,
Mhm.
like on their handles, like, I had to, like, rack my brain for a second and be like, "Who is this person in real life?"
Yeah.
So, yeah, I just feel like there's and then if you take any sorts of, like, medications, there's so many people that, have different prescriptions and stuff, and a lot of those are disassociative or even, like, melatonin, like, so how can we get more embodied and get more connected in our everyday lives, which if you live in a metro area are particularly successful if or I'm sorry, particularly stressful. I mean, if you have a phone and you live in middle America, it's
Yeah.
probably stressful.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I think at one point there was that distinction between like what it's like to live in an urban city versus like, oh, you live somewhere else. Now, modern living, it brings with it its own level of stress. And part of the reason why, and this will partially answer your question, I think, is because we have access to too much information. Like, honestly, for the amount of information that we have access to, we simply don't need to know all of that. And at some point, that becomes really, really stressful and toxic to, I mean, mental in general. Like, let's think about eating. If you were eating food all day, then indiscriminately you're just eating food, then you probably wouldn't feel well, right? Your body is going to be very heavy. You'll probably be lethargic, sick. You might even throw up, whatever. And so mentally, as we're on so many different devices, switching between, whether it's doom scrolling through TikTok and all the things,
No, TikTok is banned.
I'm not even going to try to name all of them, to be honest.
Yeah, no, the
Um,
social media and just, like, the screens and the
all of it.
advertisements everywhere and
Yeah.
yeah.
So what it does is it basically wires our system to always be hyper vigilant and on alert. Alertness, especially from a biological sense, registers as fight or flight. Fight or flight registers the chemistry of stress. The chemistry of stress then has this cascading effect to so much of what we're seeing in the world when it comes to like many of the chronic conditions, people that aren't sleeping. And again, this is not a prescription here. It's just kind of, again, painting a picture. um, but even when it comes to access to unnatural light, there's so many things of modern living that really turn the system on in a way that oftentimes we're not aware of. And
Yes.
so mental hygiene, I would say, is one that absolutely everyone should be aware of. um, with the level of intention. Like, what are you taking in mentally? What are you taking in?
Yeah, for sure. I can definitely feel myself when I go through. I mean, I'm always like slightly addicted to the phone. I'm not going to sit here and lie, especially like with what I do and professionally and all that. It requires me to be on the screen a certain amount of time. It requires me to like follow along what's trending and this and that. Um, but I can definitely feel when I'm, like, overdoing it versus, like, those days. There's some days where I'll just, like, leave my phone, on my bed or, like, in the other room and just disconnect, and there's, like, just like a certain weight that gets lifted off of you, or even just like sometimes I swear it's just like everybody has access to you all the time. Like, they can text you whenever they want, they can call you whenever you want. And like, I feel bad because there's definitely periods where like I just like have so many messages and I can't do it. Like, I can't, it's just like mentally, I can't even look at my messages.
Yeah.
So,
And not only the access, but then like this, like, almost, dare I use the word, entitlement of like getting a response instantly, or pinging that
yeah.
email or doing that thing right in the moment. So it's like even our time becomes hijacked in a way that it's not even our own, because again, we're pulled here, we're pulled there, we're going to do this and answering to that. And so
I do tell people if I don't answer you though, give it a few days and text me again. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Like, don't text me a bunch in a row, but text me a few days later and be like, "Hey, did you see that message?" And I'll probably be like, "No, sorry, got
yeah,
lost, but thank you
yeah.
for texting me again."
So I want to acknowledge something that you said. That moment of realizing that it's just too much. That's a sense of, like, I'm like, embodiment. Like, can you feel that in your body? Maybe it's in your shoulders.
Mm.
There's an expression that says,
My
feels
left shoulder right under my chicken wing. It's like it gets
okay,
right there.
real tight up in
Yeah.
there.
Oh, whew.
So like that expression that says, like, it feels like I'm carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders. So we carry a lot of tension through the shoulders, through the neck. This might also manifest as like headaches. These
Mm.
chronic headaches could be connected to all of this space.
I also recommend blue light glasses. That's what, and I don't actually need glasses. My eyesight is impeccable, if I might say so. But I am very sensitive to blue light, and I was getting horrible migraines just
Hmm.
consistently, and I was like, well, I the last time this happened, I was pregnant, and I was like, I don't think that that's really a possibility at this moment. um but yeah, I just started looking into, I used the internet. I was like, "Internet, what's my problem?" And one of the things said, "Well, how long are you looking at the screen?" So I got myself a pair of blue light glasses. I feel like those help. But nothing helps more than just like a weekend away from the screen in general.
Yeah, it's a balancing act,
Yeah.
right? Because it's not to sort of get on and say like, oh, this is a bad thing, and all of these things are, I mean, they're like tools.
Mhm.
And the idea is that we can use the tools and not allow the tools to use us.
So we have learner's mind, right? Learner's mindset.
Yeah,
We have mental doing some mental hygiene. What are some other tips that you can give us for navigating this crazy world?
we are made for movement. We are made for movement. And you know I feel like we live in a culture that is very like endpoint focused. This might, maybe some of it is because we were trained to get that grade at the end, or getting that paycheck at the end, whatever it is. But we tend
No,
to
my mom always told me
we
it's
t-
not about the
it's
destination, it's about the journey.
but even with like exercise, for example, right? It becomes that thing that we just check off the list. We do it, it's done. All right, cool. But like, we were made for movement, right? And when I say made for movement, meaning like more regular movement within our day, all day, right? So
Yeah.
definitely getting some movement in, and this is a, I mean, this is a huge category of possibilities. One of the things that I like to do is I actually teach a chair yoga class, and it's so funny because people say, like, you're able-bodied, you're strong, you can do all of this stuff, like, why do you teach chair yoga? And honestly, the part of the reason why is because it's so accessible, and also it's one of those that when we think about momentum, right? We got to start from where we are.
Right.
And so you think about the barriers to,
Yeah,
you know,
barriers to entry. I was
barrier,
like, "Should I
it's
go to the park? Do I have to drive all the way to the park to do the
all that,
thing, or
all
can I
that,
just walk around the neighborhood?"
all that,
Yeah.
all that. So yeah, movement is another one that I definitely recommend. Um, and paying attention to posture.
Okay.
Posture is a huge one. Um, there's a great book called The Body Keeps the Score. I don't know if there are readers out there. I definitely recommend checking out some of that work, because basically this is some of the work that came out that suggests that the traumas, whether they be big T or little t, they register in the body. And so there are emotional signatures related to posture, related to um, so many other aspects of the physical body. Anything that can bring us into a greater awareness of being in these meat suits, this carnation.
Yeah, sometimes I do, like, get the sense that, like, I'm, like, here and, like, the rest of me is just, like, kind of, like, I don't know, like, dangling around there. I've heard people describe that way being, like, like, some weird, or, like, not weird, I don't mean to be, like, weird, but, like, something that's, like, super disassociative, like, not a great condition to have.
Mhm.
So, but I don't know, sometimes that is how I feel, right? Because I feel, like, very much, like, up here.
Yeah.
Um, but when you have to go out and move your body and, like, um, do push-ups or do a squat, or, like, do, like, some yoga move, like a downward dog or something, then you're reminded that actually, like, it can't just be this, right? Like, it all has to work together, and I feel more clarity when I have been moving, right? Like, obviously, there's definitely, like, those periods of time, like, when you're just, like, so fatigued after, like, doing a lot of movement, but, when you're, again, in that nice balanced place between doing some good movement. I did, like, 10 sprints the other day. Thank
Sweet.
you very much. That was my debate whether we should, like, go down to the park or do it here. Um, I did do the sprints though, and, before my body got really sore that evening, I had this period of time where I was like, "Ooh, I'm feeling good," you know? Like, I feel my body's here, I feel strong, like, I can, like, hold myself up,
Yeah.
you know? Like, it's just something about it. I
Yeah.
guess it's like the runner's high, except, like,
Hmm.
I'm not like, I can't do the long distance running thing. So I like the sprints, you know? Like, I feel like that's a good balance.
Yeah. No, for sure.
So, now you live in New York City, right?
Yep.
And, we've been talking about all this stuff, and it's really nice to talk about this stuff. But, when you go out into the world, how does it actually play out? Like, when you're navigating a city that just in normal times, right? Like, the hustle, the bustle, there's people everywhere. You gotta get on the train on time. You gotta get to this place. Um, and now I feel like there's an added element in the city of just, like, you have to be, like, super vigilant. I mean, I don't know where you live in the city. I've really only been going in and out of Manhattan lately, and there's just, like, a noticeable difference, I would say, over the last few years, of just, like, being worried that one of these kind of, like, zombie-looking people might come at you or something, like, and I'm not exaggerating, like, literally, all over Manhattan. It's really sketchy. So, what does this look like in real life? How can you really be stress free in such a stressful environment that you have to be hyper vigilant in?
Yeah, that's a ooh. It's interesting because
Maybe your perception is different because you live in New York City. I don't know.
listen, my perception is, I mean, I see the world. I'm not I'm not blind like that. um yeah, when I look out, it's interesting. I was saying to someone recently that there is a certain tension that exists, um and people are suffering. People are suffering in a lot of different ways, and in some ways that I potentially will never understand. um when I think about moving through the world, one of the things that's really important for me is to be, yes, aware. And a lot of it is aware of how situations, circumstances, environments are impacting me from the inside. So one of the things you were talking about, was when being hyper vigilant and just kind of being alert. Part of that, for me, really registers because here's the thing: the word safety, we use it a lot in our culture, right? A lot of people talk about safe spaces. A lot of people talk about creating safety, and I think that's a really loaded.
Got to take the shots for your health and safety.
It's a loaded one, right? I think one of the most important things that we can learn to do is to practice sourcing safety from inside. So, in some sense, moving through different environments gives sort of an opportunity to recognize when things aren't feeling safe, truly. You know what I mean? And really what that feels like for you. So that too becomes almost this lesson, as opposed to walking around all the time hyper vigilant, because the alternative is that unless again there's some awareness and a practice, once you're up there, you're elevated, then that's kind of your base state. So this is how one moves through the world if the nervous system isn't regulated. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it definitely does. I mean, don't put yourself in a dangerous situation unnecessarily, I would say. But
Right.
I probably go the other way, right? Like go to a place where you're really safe and then like go versus being outside versus, I get what you're saying. Like you have to be realistic about the danger you're in at any given time. You can't just like be at this blanket, everything's fearful all the time. So be realistic with yourself. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Because I
Um,
think
Go
because
ahead.
I think that's um one of the issues is just this constant fear pill that is constantly being pumped out
Yeah.
there. Because again, and this is, maybe it gets a little woo woo, but where energy and attention goes, that's going to magnify.
Oh, yeah, I mean, and, I don't really think that's super woo-woo, right? Like, if you're thinking bad thoughts and you're constantly putting yourself down, it's hard to have self-confidence,
Right.
whereas if you're, like, constantly speaking yourself up, you might be a little overconfident in yourself. So, no, that it does make sense. You can't go around living your life totally in fear. You have to apply the proper amount of vigilance where necessary and then do your mental hygiene, like your maintenance to make sure that you're giving yourself those breaks. Um I guess the other aspect of this, right? Of being able to measure where you are in a space versus the threat level is gonna be like the news that you intake too, right? So again, it's going back to making sure that not just like in your physical space where you're being, but like what's your online activity like? Who are you speaking with? What are you thinking about yourself?
Yeah. Something interesting. I was writing in maybe my journal one day, and I took the letters of news, NEWS.
Mhm.
And can you imagine that makes a compass?
Wow.
And think about what typically the news does for people. It directs people how to move, how to think, how to. So when we take those four letters, it's like really interesting kind of breakdown there.
That's like my son. Oh my god, my son, he pulled this thing on me. I was like, "Oh yeah, like we should go to the library and get a book." He was like, "No, all they do is lie at the library. That's why it's called the library." I was like, "Allegedly in the history book what they said." Yo, I swear, he's too smart for his own good.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
Yes. I was like, "All right, we're not going to the library anymore." So look it up on the internet, right? Because that's so much better. Reliable sources. No, but I think, one thing that I was like, having kids is super stressful, but at the same time, it's like it also is this opportunity constantly to like go into this other world
Mm,
and like just escape into whatever fantasy land he's in at the moment. Sometimes it's super intense, like we're like fighting off zombies and stuff. Other times we're like building forts
yeah.
and I don't know, taking a bunch of snacks and eating them on the couch, even though we're not supposed to do that.
Where do we lose that?
Oh, it's a good question. I think responsibility, right? Like, I guess, like, for me, like, a lot of the time, especially now that I mostly work from home, there's definitely this constant, I wouldn't say a battle, but it's like a constant thing that I have to think about, right? Of like, okay, this is work time, this is play time, when my door is closed, like, you can't just come busting in my room, you have to knock. Or sometimes we'll set up a schedule, be like, "All right, like, for the next hour and a half, it's mom's work time, and then we'll take a 30-minute break and, do basketball together, and then I have another hour of work and whatever, we set it up like that. So it gets difficult sometimes, I guess, but I think being responsibility of an adult, like I have to pay bills and I have like I have to make sure that my son stays safe and stuff.
Yeah.
So I think there's the realistic part. I think there's also like the heuristic part, right? Like you create all these mental heuristics and shortcuts because you've done it so many times before. Like you have experience. Like we don't need to go through every single time, step one, two, three, four, because I know it, right? We can just go get there. Yeah, so I think those are probably the two major things, right? Responsibility and just like experience, been there, done that.
Hmm. I think some of it too takes out like this gift of imagining. Like as we grow older,
Right.
and
Well, the
take
brain
on
connections
more.
though, right? Like
Yeah, what about them?
like when you're a kid, and sorry to interrupt you, just made me think like kids have all these like way more neural connections in their mind, right? Like, and then there's like a pairing off that happens where it's like the most used ones like harden and then like all these extra ones sort of like wither away. I think that there is a biological component too.
Yeah, so you're describing like this process of neuronal pruning,
Yes, that
where
one.
that saying of like if you don't use it, you lose it. Yeah, so like as we get older and we start to take on more of these responsibilities, some of that imagination, some of that creativity, sometimes goes out the window as well. Like that was something that I remember for me as a kid. One of the things that I really wanted to believe that I could draw, like visually. Like I really wanted to believe that I could like take this image out of my head because, you know, I got this like brilliant house that is in my head. And so of course I grab a piece of paper, I grab a pencil and I start drawing, and it's the absolute worst drawing ever. Right. So I convinced myself from like experiences like that, like, oh, I'm not creative. I don't have an
Okay.
imagination. And so, you know, some of that starts to, I think, prune out as well as
Right.
we get a little bit
And you
older.
also, like, can have things to compare it to, I think, too, right? You've seen so many other great houses, whereas, like, when you're kind of a little kid and, like, you draw a house, you're like, "Yo, this is the best house ever!" Yeah, like and then it's like, "It's the worst, I hate it!" Whatever it is, like, one extreme emotion to the other. Um, I mean, and there's certainly something beautiful to that. I mean, but I don't know, like, if you can't exist like that at all periods of time in your life, you know? Like, there's a reason that kids have parents and, like, have adults.
Yeah, for sure.
So,
For
but
sure.
certainly as, parents or just adults, we can look at the way children move through the world and say, "Okay, we need to re-embrace some of those things."
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. Especially again when it comes to looking out into the world. Uh, some of it is, you know, on fire. We need some creative solutions, right? I think doing things the same way um, is not necessarily the answer.
And I mean, that's why I love having this podcast because it gives me the opportunity to connect with so many amazing people that see the world from a different perspective, have different ideas. I hope that people out there find it as a mind expanding as I do. And I think a lot of these tips have been super useful. I would say, like, probably we've heard a lot of them before, but I like having them all in one place, one easy to go get place. But also, you just need those reminders. Just like you got to remind your kid every time they, leave their room to turn out the light for the first 18 years of their life, and then maybe they'll get it. We need reminders too about, you know, how to re-embody with ourselves. And a lot of times too, just somebody else there either to like hold you accountable, to act as a sounding board, or as inspiration. I'm definitely the type of person that I mean, I'm pretty self-motivated, but I do that much better, like, when I'm with somebody else and, like, they just push me to that next level, and I want to impress them, and I want, to make it worth their time, so, I guess those are sort of, like, my closing thoughts. How about you? What do you got for the people? What do you have coming up that people can maybe, attend if you have a workshop, or where can they find you online?
Yeah. So I am active on mostly on Instagram, handle mindfulness with Timothy. There's some interesting and really exciting rebrand things coming up. So if you are not already following me, then definitely hop on. I do a free weekly meditation. Anybody that wants to jump in and whether you have a practice and you want to deepen it, whether you have never sat for a meditation before, definitely check me out there. I do a free weekly meditation. Next,
On Instagram.
I do it separate on Zoom, but
Okay.
I post about it on Instagram.
Okay, cool,
So
I'll have to check that out.
all the sign up things are available there. For the month of May, I have a number of workshops coming up. I have one workshop coming up to support parents with considerations for children, specifically around depression and anxiety. So these two kind of extremes. Um, and I also have a mastermind group that I'm going to be starting up again where I work with young adult men between the ages of 24 to 35. So
Awesome.
this one I'm actually in the middle of now, but I'm gonna go ahead and say it because I'll run another one at the beginning of the fall.
Alright, it sounds like you have such good stuff going on. I gotta come in and check out one of your meditations. I used to do transcendental meditation. Actually, the high school where I worked at, we had a transcendental meditation program where any student, any teacher could get trained in it. and then we stopped twice a day and we meditated. Or if you didn't want to, you could just rest. Like it was like it wasn't forced. It was just we would stop and we would call it quiet time, so you could just be quiet, you could put your head down, or you could meditate. And everybody was trained in how to do this specific transcendental meditation. And we had on-site coaches, or I don't know what they call them, like mentors maybe, where like if you wanted to check in, and teachers too, like if you were having a super stressful day, you could just like go to them and be like, hey, can we do a meditation together, check in. So I think it's a super useful practice, but it's definitely something that I've fallen out of consistently. I would say probably like once a month, maybe twice a month, I'll do a session. So I'd like to get back into that. So I'll have to pop into one of your sessions.
Yeah. I always describe meditation as like the superfood of mindfulness.
Yeah, it's really like a whole other world, man. It's pretty crazy, and it definitely I is one of those like keys to, I think, bridging that gap between like the hard science, the tangible, and then the untangible, but like also being as real, like that untangible being as real as as the tangible.
Absolutely.
All right, guys. I appreciate everybody who checked in out there. Thank you so much, Timothy, for coming in, sharing your knowledge. We definitely have to, like I said, make that meditation thing happen, but link up one of these days in the city. And, until next time, think free, live free, and give all the glory to God.
Peace, y'all.